Oh my goodness. Yo, it feels so good to be back on the microphone. It has been so long. Well, Stevie, you were just looking at the last recording we did. It was over a month ago. We just first of all, I want to say I apologize to everybody who's listening. Actually, I don't apologize because we're doing this for fun and I have a life and Steve has a life. But even still, I feel bad that all of our listeners who've been waiting so ravenously for the next episode have had to wait for such a long time. They've had to just enjoy the summer and everything else that's going on. So, hope you guys are all surviving out there. But just to give a little bit of context for anyone that doesn't know, I think most of you do who at least are listening now. But for those of you that don't know, I just moved back to the States from South Africa. So this is amazing. This is the first recording that I'm actually going to be a part of that I'm not recording at 11:30 at night, which is amazing. So hopefully my voice sounds a bit more awake. Although I did wake up at 5 o'clock this morning to bring my dad to the airport, so I'm working on about 4 hours of sleep right now. But either way, it's nice to be recording before the sun goes down and before it's time for bed. But the last couple weeks have just been absolutely crazy for me, getting home and being jet lagged and having to adjust back uh, physically and socially as well. Obviously, there's a ton of people here. Almost my whole life is here. And so coming back, there's a million people that have wanted to see me and that I've wanted to see. And there's not really been a whole lot of time to actually just sit down and take a breath, let alone record an hour and a half long podcast episode. So I've been able to keep up with the MCU and watch all the episodes. So I know what's going on. Um, but it has been a while, and I appreciate Steve bearing with as I've moved back and adjusted back and being patient with my schedule. So it's awesome, and part of Steve, you can maybe elaborate on this, but part of the last month, kind of what we've learned, and even just through the whole time podcasting, is that it's very challenging for us both being fully employed and having the relationships in our lives and putting out an episode every single week when we're the ones who are recording it, editing it, doing the research and watching the episodes multiple times beforehand to know what we're talking about, doing the actual editing and uploading and all that. Doing all that on top of very busy lives already on a weekly basis has been a lot of work. It's been so fun, and I'm just absolutely thrilled with what we've been able to do so far. And thank you all for listening. But we decided that for at least the duration of What If, since these are shorter episodes, they're only about a half hour each, that we can kind of combine them to be 2 episodes of the show for 1 episode of us. So that way we can hopefully put out a better product, a better show for you guys, have a bit more time to prepare, a bit more time to edit better, and and just save ourselves a little bit of the stress of having to come out and put out a product every single week, put out an episode very consistently every single week with no days off. So so today we'll be going over episode 1 and 2 of What If, and then you'll check back in 2 weeks from now, and we'll do episode 3 and 4. Since we're just giving our opinions and everything, hopefully that will give everyone plenty of time to see the episodes. And since one thing doesn't lead into the next, we're not predicting like what's going to happen in the next episode, since it's not one continuous story. This way, it seems best and seems appropriate. So hopefully everyone understands, and hopefully we can put out some great shows as a result of the extra time and extra just ability to rest. So Steve, do you have anything to add to that, or are we just ready to hop into the last couple episodes?
Yeah, I'd like to, first of all, and most importantly, say welcome back to America, Justin. Missed you for, what was it, 6 months? I don't know. Time's a construct in pandemic land. And honestly, it still feels like March 2020 at times. So, zero idea how much time has passed since you left, but glad that you're back in the United States now. And I got to see you a couple times since you've been back, and it's been really great having you. So, just had to get that, off my chest here first. But would love to get right into our discussion of What If, because
let's do it.
These first 2 episodes struck very different chords for me, and I like them both, but for different reasons. And we're going to start with the first episode, which was the first Avenger, Captain Carter, instead of Captain Rogers. And basically the premise, well, let me back up a little bit here. So if you're not 100% familiar with What If as a series, basically the premise is there are alternate realities. Now that the multiverse has been opened up through Loki, we know that there are other universes where other versions of our characters exist. And in all the realities, things don't play out exactly the same way they do as the main MCU timeline. So What If is told from the perspective of the Watcher, this kind of ethereal being who is just out there in the multiverse, watching over different timelines and observing the events. He states multiple times that he is not able to or can't or won't interfere with those events for unspecified reasons, but he's basically narrating these alternate versions of the stories we know and love already. The first episode is what if Agent Carter, Peggy, Margaret, took the super soldier serum instead of Steve Rogers. And this episode was, I thought, a perfect introduction to the series and to the kind of idea of these multiversal versions of our stories that we've seen before with a twist. Now, I thought the second episode, when we get to it here in a little bit, did a much better job of exploring the possibilities that could come about as, one change affects the whole story. But we'll get to that when we discuss that here shortly. The episode with Agent Carter and Steve Rogers starts off with Peggy trying to stop the explosion from going off as Steve is, in the chamber trying to undergo the experiment that will turn him into Captain America. And the explosion goes off before the procedure is complete in this universe. And almost, everything is exactly the same. The doctor's still shot. Lots of people are injured. And Steve isn't able to go through with the procedure because he got shot in the stomach by the Hydra agent. Now, with time ticking down and basically only one shot to get this experiment right, Agent Carter takes the initiative and jumps into the machine, and Howard Stark, still executes the experiment, and she becomes Captain Carter. She gets massively beefed up the same way that skinny Steve Rogers did in the first Avenger, and just becomes like an Amazonian force. She is just enormous, and Steve remains like a scrawny little dude. And it was just funny to see the dynamic that existed between them not really change with their physical roles being different. It seemed like that was to illustrate that the bond that they had was real, and obviously went beyond the physical. Because even, with the roles swapped, and she was now this massive, insanely strong woman, and he was still this scrawny little dude, they had a real connection. And you saw that throughout the episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That was the thing that I think the cool part about the episode was that even though a lot of things changed, obviously, like who got the serum and how they interacted with Red Skull and everything that happened past it, even with all of those differences, it was important that they had some sort of similarity, continuity type of deal. Because they wouldn't become different characters, like, with different character, I guess, just because of this one thing. And so it's great that they have, like, consistency through it as well. Because if they just said, oh, this one thing changed and now they're all totally different people and yada, 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 then it's like, okay, well, then we have no relatability to them because they're not the characters that we knew. And so here, it was awesome that they were able to show like you were saying, even though she's like huge, like when she steps out, I just started laughing because I'm like, oh jeez, she's like what, like 6'5" and just towering over everybody and just huge shoulders and everything, and they still during the episode, are, I don't know, being in love and everything. So it's
Smitten is the word I
yeah,
would use.
smitten. I was trying to think of a good word, I just couldn't think of one. But yeah, no, it's great that continues because especially because that was the whole reason Cap didn't come back right after Endgame, was because of that connection that he had with her, and so it's heartwarming, I suppose, to know that even if the roles were reversed, that still would have, like in Interstellar, right? Love is the only thing that goes across dimensions, apparently. So
it's love, Murph.
yeah, so they must have watched Interstellar and got it from that. But yeah, yeah. What were your just overall thoughts on episode 1? I know you said already that you liked them both, but
Yeah, so I did like episode 1. As the episode progressed, I was expecting the story to diverge from the original first Avengers more significantly than it did. Pretty much the only things that are different, though, are, they go after the Tesseract sooner, which I don't know necessarily how that was, changed with just a different super soldier, but they're able to go get the Tesseract, and Howard Stark is able to basically create the first Iron Man suit, which Steve Rogers then pilots. We see in, I think it's Iron Man 3, or it's Iron Man 2, actually, where Tony finds the stuff left by his father, and he remarks that he was limited by the technology of his time, but he knows what he would be capable of if he had it available to him. And so this is a version of Howard Stark that would have insane power available to him, in the form of the Tesseract. So he creates this indestructible Hydra Stomper Iron Man suit. And we see a lot of amazing action sequences. I gotta be honest, I really did like the action in this first episode. We see kind of the difference between Peggy and Steve, in that Steve really holds himself back when he fights because he doesn't necessarily want to hurt anybody or kill them. He just wants to achieve his goal without necessarily, straight up murdering people. Peggy, on the other hand, has no such qualms. She is straight up killing Hydra guys left and right. Like, she is Spartan kicking them through like sandbags and kicking them off motorcycles. She suplexed like a truck full of guys. Punched a guy right in his knee, and then Falcon punched him directly into the ground so hard that the pavement cracked. Like, if you've seen Agent Carter, you know that Peggy has, a bit more physical fighting style. And as a trained agent, obviously she would have more of a background fighting than a skinny Steve Rogers. So it makes sense that, a souped up version of her would be a better fighter than, a souped up version of Steve Rogers. So there's a lot of good stuff in there in terms of the action. I thought this show, before even watching the episode, I thought that this show being animated would really give Disney an opportunity to let their animation department kind of flex its muscles. We've seen a lot of really good, obviously, acting and voice acting and CGI over the MCU so far, but for a show to be strictly animated gives them a lot more flexibility in terms of being creative with the medium and having fantastic sequences that are visually arresting. The one sequence that comes to mind in particular was when she kind of jumps over the castle wall on their last mission, and that sequence was just so well animated that, I thought it was fantastic. And I'm sure I'm not alone in saying this, but something that I didn't necessarily love about this episode was kind of how closely it stuck to the original first Avenger storyline. Like I said earlier, there were some slight tweaks to the original storyline. Bucky doesn't fall off the train. They capture Zola, so there's never any Winter Soldier program. and now Steve is in a big Iron Man suit. But aside from that, the story was essentially the same. They go after the Tesseract and Red Skull, who is using it to kind of try to conjure some super weapon for Hydra. In the first Avenger, he's obviously using it to power, all their weapons. In this Captain Carter episode, he is using it to summon some sort of interdimensional beast, which immediately backfires and kills him as soon as it comes through this portal that he's opened up. Which, I mean, I never want to quote Quicksilver, but you didn't see that coming? Like, dude, like, what was the plan? How were you thinking you were going to control this massive tentacly monster that you summoned from basically hell, I'm assuming? I have no clue where this thing came from. But, like, that was obviously slightly different than, what happened in the original movie. But essentially the story was the same. There was a montage of Carter beating up Nazis and Hydra on her way to the ultimate mission to stop Red Skull. And they stop Red Skull at the end. She pushes this thing back into this dimensional hole with the shield and, is lost for 70 years. At the end, we see Nick Fury and Hawkeye using the Tesseract to reopen the portal, and she comes out and they tell her that it's been, however long since the war ended. And so it's basically the same ending to Captain America, the First Avenger. There's very little that was different in terms of the actual storyline. And not that the little details weren't interesting and, fun to spot, but there were too many similarities for me here. And I thought that it not necessarily was a wasted opportunity, because I do feel like it was a good introduction to this series. People who are necessarily not on board or not 100% sure what this premise is all about are introduced with kind of a softball episode to just get them on board with the premise and say, okay, I can go along with this. One change, leads to a few more, and we get a slightly different story out of it. Cool, I'm with it. The second episode, I think, does a much better job of showing the ripple or butterfly effect of that one small change, and leads to a vastly different story than what we saw in the original cut. And I just thought that was a better application of all the potential that What If has to offer. The first episode, a lot of things to enjoy about it, but overall left me like wanting them to do more with the story instead of kind of following the same formula as the first Avenger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I have a bit of a different take than you. I preferred the first episode to the second. And from what you were saying, it seems like you preferred the second. I guess you didn't just come out and say it, but
I did. Like I'll come out and say it. I preferred the second episode to the first.
Okay. And I think part of the reason was because with the what if scenario and idea, I expect there to be some amount of like logic to it and reason, and consistency just within the rules that have been established in the MCU and the world, which, obviously that's very inconsistent because, when different directors have taken over different characters, it's been all inconsistent and everything, but at least to a degree, right? And I liked both episodes, right? I'll say that. I didn't dislike either of them.
Oh, so did I. Don't get me wrong. I have my complaints about the first one, and you, I'm sure, will voice yours about the second here. But I think we both thoroughly enjoyed both of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And, well, I have a couple critiques that are for both of them, although mainly the critique was just, like, they both felt a little bit rushed, which I appreciate that they're only half hour, and I think that's great, because I think they're going for a bit of a younger audience with these, or at least opening it up to that, and I think the time is great. I think both just kind of tried to fit a little bit too much in, that some of the scenes just like jumped, and I think those could have been smoothed out a bit more. But that's like my main critique of like both of them. but that's also just how animated shows and kids shows especially go. And so I think if we view this more as a kid show, Avatar: The Last Airbender or The Clone Wars, something like that, which obviously there are plenty of adults that love those, but they're targeted at kids. I think that gives me a bit more perspective on that. Although this is clearly meant for adults as well, but it just seems with the animation style and the length that they're going for a bit younger. You were going to say something?
Yeah, so I agree with you about the pacing of the shows. I would really love to see these be even 40 minutes, 45 minutes. I know that's kind of an awkward slot. Normally we go for the 30 or, full hour, basically 50-minute episodes. So far with what Disney's done with their Marvel Disney Plus shows. And it does feel like the episodes are kind of at breakneck pace. Essentially they're retelling an entire movie with differences in 30 minutes. And yeah, we've already seen the original, so we basically know the whole thing. But I would like to see a little bit more fleshing out. And maybe that will happen later in the season. They'll have a little bit longer episodes, but I doubt it. I don't really have any reason to believe that would happen. And I would just like a little bit more time with these new versions of characters that we see. But I also do agree with you that this is, I don't want to say a kid's show, but again, it's animated, it's made in a perfect 30-minute bite-size, segment. So it's totally believable that this is for, a younger audience and will likely continue to be that way for the whole rest of the season. I do wish the pace would slow down a little bit because it feels like we're flying through essentially a whole movie's plot in half an hour. But that's, again, I agree with you. That's my biggest critique of the series as a whole so far, but definitely not like a deal breaker or something that causes me to not enjoy each episode so far. But I guess we'll see what happens with the future episodes.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think it just requires a bit of a mentality or a perspective shift or expectation shift, I guess is a better way to put it. I think now that we have these first two under our belts, we'll be expecting it and, it'll be fine. It's not the biggest deal in the world to me. The one thing that kind of stuck out to me was in the second one, which, sorry, I'm getting way off track here. I got to go back to what I was talking about. But in the second one,
no, you can go into the second one.
Well, no, I want to talk about the first one. While we're on the topic of the pacing, in the second one, there was a classic, 25-minute kids show moment where they wanted to go and break into the collection, right? And Yondu was like, nope, no way it's happening, nope. And then there's the literal next scene is T'Challa just walking up and he immediately changes his mind, where they introduce conflict and it's immediately resolved, in less than, literally the next scene, less than 30 seconds later, it's immediately resolved. It gives you the kind of why even bother having that in there to begin with. And, that's something that's pretty common in kids shows and kids movies and stuff like that. So again, not the end of the world, but when that happened, I was kind of like, why even bother? That's 30 seconds that you could have included on something else. But either way, not the biggest deal. So going back to what I had been talking about, sorry, I got way off track, but I had been talking about internal consistency and that with respect to the two episodes and why I preferred the first one. I totally understand what you're saying about the idea of the butterfly effect and seeing how far it will go. And I think that's awesome as well, and I want to see that, but it has to make sense as to why one thing impacts the next. And for me, the first episode was yeah, okay, Sharon Carter gets the serum. They're still
Peggy
fighting
Carter.
World War. Oh my gosh. Not
Yeah,
Sharon Carter.
don't bring the power broker into this. She's not born yet.
Yo, you're totally right. I'm just gonna delete this all out.
No, that's staying in.
It's staying in. Alright, we made mistakes. That's all good. This is all live, not edited at all. Yeah, no, not the First of all, how do you get Peggy for Margaret? That has never made sense to me. But
yeah, how do you get? Yeah, nicknames don't make sense.
They don't. But Peggy gets the serum, and they're still in the war though. like they're still in the war and they still have to take out the Red Skull, and all of the American soldiers with Bucky were still captured. And so if they just ignored the rest of that, like the super soldier was designed to be in that war. Obviously to be in future wars as well, but was designed to help win that war. And so like it wouldn't really have made sense if they diverged too much from that. Like I think they could have done a better job for sure. And I think the way that they tried to at the end was a little bit clunky. For me, what would have been perfect, I think, is they have a couple of the callbacks, right? They have the funny line when they're on the train and she picks up Bucky and he's like, "Oh, you almost took my arm off," you know. Obviously that's a call to when he actually loses his arm and
Yeah,
everything.
speaking of which, I loved every single one of Bucky's lines in this episode. He was just making terrible dad jokes with every word that came out of his mouth, and I loved it. It was hilarious.
Like I was saying all during the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Bucky needs more screen time, and he needs more time to shine. He's one of the best. Oh, never mind, whatever. But I liked how they had the callbacks because that's kind of fun, and like I liked how they had that during the parts that made sense. Like she still had to go rescue them, and they still had to infiltrate the train, and like all of the same things to win the war that Steve did, they would have had to do. And I think the opportunity for the biggest divergence, which they whiffed on completely, was at the end. When Red Skull was saying that he was bringing his champion from another dimension, my first thought was it's either like Thanos or just some villain that we've seen before or some monster that we're familiar with who clearly must be older, right? So maybe it's someone of the Black Order, maybe it's Thanos, maybe it's Loki, right? Maybe he's bringing Loki in because Loki was not on Earth at this point, right? Maybe it was like the Grandmaster or like some champion from there or like some
Let me interject my
something.
theory that I was thinking as soon as he said that.
Yeah.
Dormammu. That was a huge missed opportunity for me. And I agree with you that it should have been a villain that we've seen from another dimension that would pose a real threat and would change the ending of the movie. Dormammu, I thought, would have been the perfect character to bring in there. And instead they just go with generic tentacles with no face. Like,
which my only thought was maybe it's the tentacle monster from the beginning of Guardians 2, but I'm like that's such an obscure reference for that monster that's basically there just to be in the scene, and we don't even see it, so like clearly that was not the intention. And so I'm like, oh, that was such a missed opportunity, and I think that was just a complete whiff. Like I'm not even going to say that it was like good but could have been better. I think that was just so what like when I watched it a second time, I was just like, oh, this is not really climactic. This is like pretty anticlimactic, and I think that is where I totally agree with you. Where that was too, it led to the exact same result, except you substitute Peggy in for Steve. You know, being in the future and being with Nick Fury and everything. So that was where I totally agree with you. But I do think for the most part, the fact that it like stuck close and it made sense how each thing progressed to the next, as opposed to the second episode where I think there were some pretty gigantic leaps in logic and characterization to serve the point of just having something different and wacky. For me, that was why I preferred the first one. And I agree, the action was amazing and it was so fun. Like, and it's just animation allows you so much more freedom without the budget restrictions or the time restrictions or just like the technology restrictions that CGI and live action needs. And it was great because they didn't have as many jump cuts as they do in live action, so it was easier to follow the actual fighting, and it didn't seem like all hacked up, and there wasn't any bad CGI, which there has been in the past in the MCU, so that was great. And that was what I was expecting, and I was thoroughly pleased by that. It was great seeing her just like obliterate dudes.
Oh yeah, when she like kneed 4 guys up against the castle wall and the last guy fell slowly and then she kicked him back up again, I lost it. That was hilarious. But I want to go back to phrase that you just said, and I'm probably going to misquote it because I already forgot exactly what exactly you said. But you said Peggy in substitute for Steve. And that basically to me was the first episode. I was like, I wanted more than just Captain America, but it's Peggy instead. Like, I understand that it's a pretty formulaic movie and there's not necessarily a ton of room for divergence and wacky storytelling there, but for 90% of this episode I just felt like I was watching a cartoon version of First Avenger with Lady Captain America, which like was entertaining for sure, but I was like, I want more from this series. Again, this is where I'll disagree with you, because I think with basically infinite possibilities, it is infinite. I mean, the multiverse is infinite, different realities, and there's so many possibilities to what we could see that I want them to go overboard and wild and give us more wacky, totally different versions of the characters we know than what we've come to expect. And I guess that's just where we part ways with our viewing of the show.
Maybe that's just a preference,
Certainly it can be, and there's nothing wrong with that, but that's where I was leaning to with the show, and that's definitely what we got in episode 2, which is what if T'Challa became Star-Lord. The Watcher starts off this episode saying that in this universe, Yondu was a little bit lazier and outsourced the job of scooping up Peter Quill to Kraglin and Taserface, who accidentally pick up T'Challa instead. And I thought it was really interesting how they tied that in and made that sort of make sense. As we know, Wakanda is on a mountain of vibranium, which, per the opening of Black Panther, crashed to Earth from like an asteroid, and that's how they basically formed their civilization. And there's a line from Kraglin where he's like, listen, like that has to be the kid we're looking for. If the cosmic signatures were like off the charts, if there's something not from Earth on Earth, that's where it was. And I thought that was just an interesting way to tie it in. And instead of just, what's a character we know that could take the place of Quill? It's like, okay, how would this make sense for him to be in Quill's place? Obviously, you send two knuckleheads, Taserface and Kraglin, to go do the job, and they're not going to, perform it properly. So, T'Challa gets scooped up at 10 years old. He's a young kid here. Yeah. And then it cuts to 20 years later, and we have the same intro scene from First Guardians where he's trying to steal the orb from the temple, and Korath and his minions burst in and they confront him, and we have that same line where Star-Lord goes, there's another name you might know me by, Star-Lord. And he doesn't even finish the sentence because Korath immediately has this insane reaction. He's like, oh my gosh, of course I know who you are. I'm your biggest fan. He's totally fanboying out. And he's having the reaction that I'd imagine Quill wanted him to have in the original Guardians. Instead of being like, who are you? Like this complete nobody, Ravager? He knows who T'Challa is and he knows his code name, and they spar for a bit, and T'Challa obviously wins, but then he kind of recruits Korath to join the Ravager crew.
He recruits him by taking his knocked out, limp body. He just kidnaps the dude.
Yeah, they breeze past that for comedic effect, but essentially, he does kidnap Korath. Then we go to a bar where the Ravagers are all hanging out, and we find out that instead of stealing from people across the galaxy, they are now just helping people. And I imagine this is kind of where you started to dislike this episode, because the Ravagers are all basically have different personalities. They have entirely different motivations from what we know of them in Guardians 1 and 2. But I think that makes sense. T'Challa raised in Wakanda as the heir to the throne and, assuming to inherit a role of massive diplomacy. would be a good diplomat in space, and he'd be able to convince people to like do the right thing. And he's such a powerful, commanding presence in every scene that he's in the MCU that it's not hard for me to imagine him having that same presence even across the galaxy. But obviously, you disagree based on the expression on your face.
Well, I'm just being. That was a thoughtful expression. Because I was trying to think. That was actually not like the biggest deal for me. I think it. At first, I was like, what? But I didn't hate it. I think it's just a little bit unrealistic and a very big jump that, that this one kid who's like 10 years old when he gets taken, right? He's been being raised and everything, but like, he's still a kid. He's still running around and like playing tag at that point, and he wants to go and explore the world and everything, right? But he's still at a very, very, very moldable age and a very, very, very like, yeah, young age where he still like has a lot of growing to do and is very able, like very easily able to be influenced, just like, middle school and late elementary school and stuff. And so to me, the fact that he would then, be with this group of people who are all just crooks basically for, those formative years and be like this perfect upstanding guy is a little bit unbelievable to me. Like, I know he's not coming from the same home situation or anything that Quill was, and so of course he has a better head start in terms of being a good person, and also there's just like personality traits and things like that. But I think the fact that he is just like so perfect and able to like convince literally everybody to do good is like, I think that was a bit much. I think they could have definitely had him like influence the Ravagers for better, because Quill eventually does, right? Like, even Quill, with all of his flaws and being like a doofus and being a kind of a selfish jerk, he's able to grow and he's able to influence the Ravagers and Yondu to become good, right? And so I don't think that's the most unbelievable thing. I think just like the extent of it, to bring peace like everywhere they go, and to have this dude who's Ronan's like not second in command, but Ronan's captain basically, the captain of like this mass murderer, genocidal maniac, like fanboy out over him. Like, I don't know, it seemed a little bit off to me, and it seemed like they were just making a couple jumps too much. But like, in theory, him being able to reform the Ravagers from within totally follows and makes sense. And I wonder if, and I just wonder, maybe this is a bad question to ask, if like the fact that this is Chadwick Boseman's last performance had anything to do with the fact of how they made him out to be so good and so awesome and so like perfect at everything. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I do think that played into it a little bit. Obviously not to take away from that.
I had that same exact thought, in regards to this being one of his last performances. I do believe that he's supposed to be in a few more episodes this season, so I don't know if this episode necessarily is the last that we'll hear from him, but man, what a voice performance. I mean, he really sold me on it being T'Challa, even if it was, an animated version. And hearing his voice one last time definitely tugged at my heartstrings, can't lie. But yeah, I get the point that you're trying to make about the effect that he would have on the Ravagers. But for me, the effect on the Ravagers was vastly overshadowed almost immediately by the effect he had on another character when Thanos shows up. And this was, you just gave a big sigh of exasperation, and I love this so much. He was able to basically convince Thanos that his plan was terrible, which obviously it was. But for the rest of the episode, we get Thanos kind of explaining his plan to everybody that he's talking to. Kind of like, some guy just pitching his maybe failed small business startup. And everybody's just like, that's a terrible idea. Like, that's just straight up genocide. And he's like, no, it's not genocide. It's random,
which is technically
and
correct.
Efficient.
Technically correct. Genocide by definition is targeted after an ethnic or cultural or people group, and so technically,
yes. So he is correct, but so he is technically not genocide. Correct.
But
yes, the best kind of correct. But it also does sound a lot like genocide. So you can see where people are getting nervous from, and I just thought it was hilarious. We see Nebula in this episode also. Every time that Thanos is like pitching this idea, she's nearby and she's just like, "Oh, Dad!" She's just so embarrassed by him giving his terrible business pitch, and that got me dying every time it happened. That was hilarious. But they have a much different relationship in this episode than we've seen in prior movies. Obviously, if he's gone straight and is not trying to wipe out half the universe, he's not gonna be such an overbearing father with that one single goal in mind. Like Nebula is completely intact for the most part. She has hair as well, and they have like a real father-daughter relationship. It seems like she is the substitute for Gamora in this episode. Obviously, if he's not out trying to conquer and slaughter half worlds, he wouldn't have ended up on Gamora's world, and would not have adopted her at some point. So it makes sense that, the relationship that he had with Gamora in the main timeline would be filled in by Nebula here. But I really liked seeing, good-ish Thanos, because he's not necessarily good. He still has it in the back of his mind that this would be a good plan to wipe out half the universe in a single instant. And Nebula's even kind of wary when T'Challa brings her the orb that holds the Power Stone. She's like, don't let the big guy know you have one of these. So it seems like it's always a possibility that he might regress into his old sociopathic self. But I really enjoyed seeing Thanos just be one of the crew here. It was really cool.
Yeah, I thought it was funny, and I thought it was way too far of a leap. But I thought it was funny, and again, I guess just I have to reset my expectations. I don't buy it for a second that would ever happen. I guess if there's technically infinite universes, then it would happen, but I don't think that's like a legit argument for it happening, because I don't know, this guy was so set that he literally sacrificed his own daughter. He was so confident. Like, the only person that he loved, he was so confident in his plan. Like, I don't buy that he would be convinced, especially because T'Challa must have done it at a much, much younger age. Because Gamora is an adult by the time, like, Guardian 1 happens, which is around the time when this would take place, which means in the time difference from her now to when she was a kid, since Thanos wouldn't have gone there, it must have meant that T'Challa had done it when he was a kid. And so that, for me, was just a bit of a stretch. But I do think it was funny, and it made me laugh when I heard that. And it was fun seeing him hang out. I was trying to figure out, was that Josh Brolin's voice? I didn't really pay attention to the credits. It sounded just like him, but
yeah, so I checked the credits afterwards, and I think the only person, or the only character that wasn't voiced by their real actor counterpart was Drax, who makes a small cameo. Hilarious one. He takes a picture with T'Challa, and he needs another one because it's a truly dreadful picture of you. And that was not Batista, but every other character, I believe. Also, except for Peter Quill, who we do see at the end, who is also not voiced by Chris Pratt in this episode. But he only has one line. So it makes sense for these characters that only have one line that they wouldn't necessarily get the actor to come in and just say one line. That's probably
Dave Bautista has been heavy at work on the new Dune movie, which I'm excited for. So he was probably just too swamped to be able to go. So speaking of,
but yes, it was Josh Brolin. It was Karen Gillan as Nebula. It was Chadwick Boseman as T'Challa. It was, I'm gonna butcher his name, but Jimon Honsu as Korath. Sean Gunn as Kraglin, and then we had This is the one that surprised me because we did have Benicio del Toro as the Collector, or as I saw in this episode, the Swole Lecter, and
he did not sound like him
did
at
not
all.
sound like himself at all. But I guess that makes sense because he was a totally different character. So
yeah, he did not sound like
as
him
Thanos
at all.
explains, as he stepped down from being a genocidal maniac, that left kind of a power vacuum on the evil side of the galaxy, and the Collector, now no longer under Thanos' heel, stepped up and filled that void. Mm-hmm. And we see that his collection is just enormous compared to what we see in the movies. And this would make sense if he'd been, at the tip of the power pyramid for, decades, unchallenged. And it also seems that he's been like harvesting parts from beings that he collects to improve upon himself. He's got some cybernetic upgrades, and he's absolutely diesel. Like he's 6'5", like 250, just rock hard abs. He's wearing like a coat with no shirt underneath just to show off his ridiculous body, and it's hilarious. But I guess the more I thought about it, part of the Collector's whole character, in the live action MCU and the main timeline is that he wants people to underestimate him. And so he kind of has, this stuttering, timid persona at times. And I think that's to get under people's radar. And, alternatively, in What if he's now basically the unchallenged leader of the dark side of the galaxy, or whatever you want to put it as, he can put that persona aside and just be this arrogant macho dude. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'm over explaining things just to make up for a change in voicing, but he did seem like a completely different character. But I really enjoyed this Collector. Like he had an insane archive of goodies that he's collected over the years. Like he had the Dark Elves, he had Malekith's dagger, he had Captain America's shield, he had Mjolnir, he had Hela's headdress, which that blew my mind. So the first scene of the episode takes place in 1988, and then it flashes to 20 years later, which would put it in 2008. That's even before the first Thor movie canonically takes place. And Hela is not released until Ragnarok, several years down the line in, 17 or 18. And that means that this version of the Collector beat Odin to release Hela, which is insane because Odin at his peak is like one of the strongest characters in all of Marvel Comics. Mm-hmm. And that to me, not only did he beat Hela and Thor and some version of Cap, but he also beat Odin to release Hela and then beat her too. Like that kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, no, that was crazy. And I mean, the Collector was for me far and away the best part of this episode. And again, I think just a little bit inconsistent where, if he's able to beat Odin and Hela and Thor, like how on earth does he lose to Star-Lord and like
yeah, I guess he got cocky.
That's a bit ridiculous. Yeah. Especially because he's been in hand since then. But regardless, power levels have always been super inconsistent in the MCU, and even Thanos in this one gets just absolutely smacked by the Black Order, even though the Black Order lost to like Falcon and Black Widow in Infinity War, which clearly they would not have beaten Thanos. So, power levels are just all over the place. But at this point, it's not even worth complaining about that because that's going to just continue to happen forever. But yeah, the Collector was definitely the best part of this. And I think for me, it was a bit of like relief, or maybe relief's not the right word, but the Collector for me in the MCU was one of those characters that I think had so much potential and seemed like they had much bigger plans for him. And then when they switched directors and kind of filled out the idea of Infinity War a bit more, they didn't really have a place for him. Because, like, there's a whole end credit scene of him collecting the ether, right, and him saying 1 down, 5 to go, right, and it was almost setting him up to be this giant force to be reckoned with, and he had like barely any scenes past the first Guardians, and then the next thing we see, he's just defeated and he's just already basically dead in Infinity War, and so it was really, really awesome seeing him get to like see what the Collector could have been, because he, for me, will always be one of those big missed opportunities of the first 3 phases. And I know there's a bunch of villains like that, and a bunch of plot lines, with this many movies and shows and stuff, it's impossible to follow through on literally everything and to plan everything out when there's so many people involved and directors and stuff. But it was awesome getting to see him, because I had always wished that he had been a bit more of a force in the MCU. So we got to see that, and it was awesome, and it was just hilarious how huge he was, and just like totally unnecessarily too. Like there was no reason to have.
I really like how they're able to show off kind of the comic book aspect of the product that they're making. I mean, MCU movies I think have done an excellent job so far of just being visualized comics. And they get a lot of heat for that because especially somebody like Martin Scorsese would be like, oh, they're not filmed, they're just CG up on a screen, and I couldn't care less about that. Like, this is comics brought to life, and What If has pushed that even further. Like, we're getting animated, like absurdly physically proportioned characters, and that's what comics are all about. Like, just ridiculous people doing ridiculous things.
Oh yeah.
And that's what I got in this episode, and that's exactly what I wanted. This to me was along the same skeleton of Guardians 1, but obviously had a ton more differences. While having the same kind of backbone and crew that were part of the first movie.
Well, not even. I mean, Ronan just never appears. Groot, Gamora, and Rocket never show up. Drax is there for like a second. So, I mean, the Ravagers and Star-Lord.
Yeah. No, you're right.
But it's pretty significantly different. And Nebula's there.
You're right.
Well.
No, the more I think about it, the more different it is. And again, that is something that definitely appealed to me. Like, I want to see a small change have a big effect on one of the stories that we know and love. And if we had just gotten Guardians 1, but T'Challa's lines replaced Quill's, like, that would have been a disappointment for me. Yeah. And that's essentially what I thought we got in the first episode with Peggy and Steve. And so I enjoyed episode 2 a lot. I don't want to say a lot more than the first one, but I enjoyed it more. And that's the type of stuff that I want to see from this show going forward, is the ripple effect had by one change. And maybe some ripples will be bigger than others. Maybe that's just how each episode is going to be. But I do know that later in the season, I believe this upcoming week is supposed to be what if Loki wins the Battle of New York and kind of rules Earth. We're supposed to get an episode down the line of Spider-Man being the Sorcerer Supreme. Those are the only 2 spoilers that I've seen, though. So
it's 2 more than me, so now I know.
Well, they could be completely wrong. I've only seen 2 promotional posters, and those were the only things on it that I can recall. So
what if Loki becomes the Sorcerer Supreme and Spider-Man wins the Battle of New York? What happens then?
That could be a complete double blind. They would do that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Speaking of, did you see that the trailer for No Way Home apparently got leaked a couple days ago, and it came down really quick, but apparently a good number of people have seen it. So I've avoided anything.
I did see that it had gotten leaked, and there's zero chance that I'm going anywhere near Marvel Reddit or anything remotely related to that until that dies down. I would love for them to put out No Way Home with absolutely zero promotional material. I want their only commercial to be Tom Holland coming out on like a black screen, like not even in costume, just like as Tom Holland, and be like, No Way Home is coming out December 22nd. You're going to come see it. Like, do you need to see a preview to be convinced to come see the 26th or 27th MCU entry at this point, and like 8th Spider-Man movie. No, like come on, you know what you're here for.
Yeah,
Come see.
I hope there's nothing.
Like, we're not giving anything away.
They're definitely not going to do that. But I think
Of course
if there
not.
was an event to do it, this would be it. But we got to talk about this. We got to talk about Black Widow. But I was finally able to see it, and I forgot, dude, how many like Marvel previews get shown in front of Marvel movies in the theaters. Like there was Shang-Chi and Eternals. I saw it twice, and in front of both of them, they had both those commercials, and I was just sitting in public with my head down in between my legs and my ears plugged going la 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 in like there, and I'm like, nope, I don't even want to hear it. And it's so loud that some sounds get through, but I was not paying attention, so I forgot them. But I was like, man, I forgot how hard it is being in a theater, avoiding like trailers and spoilers. Man, they make it hard.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I saw Free Guy last week, and normally I try to arrive about 15 to 20 minutes after the movie start time says on the ticket to miss all the previews because I don't want to see any of them. And we showed up about that same time, 15 to 20 minutes after the start time, and one preview was ending, and I was like, oh, okay, hopefully we made it for the end. And then there were only 2 previews that showed after we arrived, and they were Shang-Chi and Eternals. And so I had to do the same exact thing and like avoid them. And I heard like the background sounds and a couple quotes, but I've forgotten them now. And without seeing them, it's hard to remember them anyways.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
it's a hard
doing my
life,
best to
dude.
avoid any sort of spoilers.
It's
we got
tough.
Shang-Chi in like, what, a week and a half?
Yeah, it's coming out soon.
10 more days, and I can't wait for that. But we do need to talk about Black Widow at some point.
Yeah, we'll find time.
I enjoyed that movie. I have a lot of thoughts about it, but that will be another full episode by itself.
Yeah. That movie, I'll just say right now, I think I loved everything except about one part, and you definitely know exactly what aspect of that movie it was that I did not enjoy.
I am sure I know exactly what you're talking about.
I'm sure that you know what I'm talking about too, but we'll save that for the curious listener later. See if you can guess.
Yes.
I'm sure you can if you watch the movie as well, because it's the one that everyone's talking about. So,
yeah.
But
so Justin did say earlier that we're going to be going the every other week here with one of these what if episodes because they're so short and kind of self-contained that we're able to do a couple of them at once, and one of them in each of their own episodes would be kind of too short. We could probably get through in like 20 minutes, and we enjoy this more longer form conversation anyways. So now that we laid that out, we are going to have to find some time to squeeze in a Black Widow episode at some point. But that's a story for another time, as the watcher would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so a good 2 first episodes. I think even with the critiques, I think it's just been a lot of fun watching What If, and you seem to agree. And
if anything, we're definitely nitpicking.
Yeah.
I think our personal preferences aside, we can agree that the pacing is a little bit too fast for our liking.
I think,
but
more than
that's an inherent issue you're gonna have when you're telling a whole movie's worth of story in 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So, not a deal breaker for us by any means, and very much looking forward to this week's episode and next week's and the week after's as well. So we'll see what happens. Maybe it won't be Loki taking over New York. Maybe I'm wrong, but we will see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just excited, man. We're back in it. There was a break between shows, and now we're back. So let's go. I know it's been a couple weeks since being back, but it's amazing. And speaking of shows, the promotional shots, the first promotional shots from the Wheel of Time show coming up on Amazon in November, they came out.
Yes, I saw you and Julia freaking out about
Julia
that.
Sent them to me.
Little nerds.
My sister Julia sent them to me, and I was like, bro, why did you do that? I didn't want to see them, and I only saw the first one, but I saw that they're out, and probably more excited for that than I am for any of the Marvel shows coming out this fall. So if you don't know anything about the Wheel of Time, look it up. It's going to be hopefully good. The book series is amazing, but that will be...
Yeah, so we're going to have interesting discussions about that when it comes out, because I have not read the books yet. Yes. And so we'll have a couple different perspectives on the show as you a book reader and me a not yet book reader. And that should be interesting.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that when it comes out. We got a lot more shows on the horizon, a lot of more movies to discuss as well. But we'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk about episodes 3 and 4 of What If.
Lots more. Yes, and before we sign off, for everyone who's still listening to this point, we currently are hoping to find someone who can volunteer part-time or full-time, emphasis on volunteer, to help us with the editing or to help us with any of the sound, help us with just any of the promotional work, because if you guys look on like the Instagram, it's a joke. I basically don't do anything. So if there's anybody who's listening that is good at or enjoys any of those things, looking to throw on your resume that you interned with a podcast and have experience in podcasting, it's a big thing now.
Yeah.
Hit us up. Like, seriously, it doesn't have to be a big commitment or anything, but if anybody is interested in editing or social media, hit us up, and we would love to have someone help us out and let us just spend more time recording. Editing has been fun to learn, but the talking and just talking Marvel and talking shows is what we love. And if we get a little bit of help, we'll be able to put out a lot more content a lot quicker.
Yeah,
so,
we just don't want to edit it ourselves is basically what it boils down to. So
I was trying to be a bit more political.
Wants to lend a hand, listen, we don't want to do it, okay? I don't want to do it.
We put up with it. We put up with it.
Yes.
But we're on the hunt, so hit us up.
Exactly. Somebody come fill this role for us, and we'll love you a long time.
Yes.
But yeah, after that quick little job posting segment, that'll be it for this episode, and we'll see you guys in a couple weeks.
Yeah. All right. Deuces.
Peace.